So by now, I'm certain that you have seen the news that there has been a red heifer that has been sacrificed in Israel. And I stumbled across Tyler's video by stumbling across somebody else's video that actually added Tyler's video to it. A man that used the word tings. In English language is just kind of funny. But anyway, the thing is, of course, the rapture cult is kind of really grabbing this and basically saying, oh, it's another sign that we're getting closer to the end. I don't know. I think just time moving forward is a sign that you're getting closer to the end. I mean, right now we're about 30 seconds into this, and you're 30 seconds closer than you were before. So here's the thing with this. So Tyler reads from Byron Stinson's Facebook post where he basically said there was a perfect red heifer, and the sacrifice was perfect, the priest was perfect, and according to the Torah, this was perfect. And he says, I know that some people will disagree when it comes to the oral Torah, but we're not focused on that. Well, I wouldn't be focused on it either, but I also disagree with your perfection statement, because there is one key component to the ordinance that is missing. And that is, as you are sacrificing this poor little red cow, that you are sprinkling its blood 7 times in the direction of the tabernacle / temple, which to this day we have neither one of those. So how can you say that this is perfect when clearly it is not perfect? Now, at first, I really didn't pay much attention to it because people have been talking about the red heifer for like a decade, and I'm just like, oh, okay, finally they did it, or whatever. But when I saw the pictures being posted, the guy that provided this red heifer was wearing a cross on his t-shirt, which got me digging into this guy to figure out, well, wait a minute, is this a Christian that is enabling the religious Jews to perform sacrifices? And yes, that is exactly what he's doing. See, I can understand passively. I can understand this rancher that just happened to raise red Angus for the meat market, and a couple of priests show up and say, we want to go through your herd and see if there's any perfect red heifers for our sacrifice. To that, I'd be like, okay, yeah, fine, go ahead. But in this particular situation, he even wrote a book. Like, this was his entire goal, was to provide a red heifer for this particular sacrifice. And again, I go back to, why is a Christian enabling this? Because I think it sends a mixed message. After all, as the church, we know that Yeshua is the perfect sacrifice. So why would a Christian be enabling the religious Jews to go back to sacrificing animals? Now, I realize in the millennial reign, as a futurist myself, we see that the sacrifice is going on, but that is because it's a memorial, not because they believe that it's for their remission of sins. Because now we're not dealing with believers that are sacrificing, we're dealing with unbelieving Jews who are sacrificing because that was according to the law. And so, as a Christian, I don't think you should be actively participating in helping this out at all. Now, we as futurists certainly see that there's clearly a temple that has to get defiled. We see in books like Daniel and Matthew 24 where you have to have a temple for the abomination of desolation. And Daniel clearly says the sacrifices cease, so at some point they start. But here's the thing is, why would a Christian be enabling this? Because it's almost like saying that there's just 2 ways to get to heaven. That's fine. You don't want to believe in Yeshua, but if we go back to the sacrifices, then, that just checks that box. And no, it doesn't check that box, because Yeshua was the fulfillment of it. And those were symbolic. And I like in the memorial to basically say, if you came over to my house and I did like a Passover Seder, it doesn't detract from Yeshua. I'm a believer that's doing the Passover Seder. It doesn't mean I have to do it, but it doesn't mean that I'm counting on that for the atonement of anything. So the same thing goes with this, is a Christian doing the sacrifices, which is really what the whole argument is in Acts chapter 21. You have to understand, these people were heated, that they wanted to unalive Paul because of what they believed that he was teaching the Jewish believers. And he's basically saying, no, I basically told the Gentiles that They did not have to learn the ordinances of the law. That basically, as believers, all they had to do was just steer clear of meats that are sacrificed to idols and blood and things that are strangled and sexual immorality. And that was the big thing back then. Like nowadays, people are just like, what's a meat that's sacrificed to idols? I mean, I think the closest thing that you come is maybe like Hillel, because I looked into it for like beef pepperoni because pork is unclean, and then I realized I might as well just stick with the pork one. But anyway, it's not the point. And instead of something that is blessed according to the laws of Islam. So, but that's basically what Paul's direction was. And so they were under the impression that he was saying, hey, you got to do away with all this stuff. Yeshua is the perfect sacrifice. And it basically came down to conscience. Like imagine being raised in that situation for years, decades. And then all of a sudden the events of the cross took place, and most people can't just stop. They continue in their religion. They can't just look at it and say, oh, well, I don't have to do that because this is what the text really says. A lot of people, they're not wired that way. And so Paul was basically saying, yeah, this was instituted. I mean, he didn't overtly say it, but this is what God instituted 1,500 years ago. And if you're a believer and you continue in it, that's fine. That was his basic argument in there. And of course, both groups, the Romans and the Jews, were not happy with him, and he basically had to play the culture card for both of those. When the Romans wanted to beat him, he was just like, I'm a Roman citizen, and they're like, oh, we can't do that. So you got to read it for what's going on. In the first century, a Jewish believer is not the same as the 21st century unbelieving Jew. Not the same. But that's his argument, and that's why I say that his argument is invalid. And his motivation, I think, is selfish, because it's essentially along the same lines as the rapture cult. Let's get the end here now because I'm ready to leave. Again, understandable. I've been through my own stuff before, so I know how much pain is in the world. It's not like I've had this perfect little plush life. But at the same time, as somebody said, basically, we're just having a conversation on when the rapture could be. And, if it's just a conversation, then my input should just be as valid as everybody else's input. You don't like my input because I'm not telling you what you want to hear, and I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear because there's nothing I need back. See, people that tell you what you want to hear, they're reliant on what it is that they want from you, whether it's attention or money. Those are the two big things. But the thing is, I'm not reliant on people. That's why I'm willing to tell the truth as far as I understand it. But so in this particular situation, if you look at his nonprofits, he's got the red heifer thing, and he wrote the book on it, and then he also has his kind of version of the Temple Institute, where he's raising money to build the third temple. Why would a Christian be doing that? If you were the temple of the Holy Spirit, why would you involve yourself in that? I can understand from like a perspective of once the temple's built and you go and you visit Israel and you see how the sacrifices were done and stuff like that, and understand what it was like in the time Yeshua walked the earth. I understand that part. But actively involved in this and helping the unbelieving Jewish people with what it is that they think they need to do to attain salvation when you know the truth, I don't think that's a good idea. So, yeah, that's just essentially my 2 cents on this. And again, it's people thinking that, if we can just get the temple, I mean, as a futurist, I certainly see the temple there. So if we can just get the temple, then guess what? We can bring the end up. And that's not what Irenaeus and Barnabas wrote about. It's time. It's 6,000 years of apostasy. Both of them said it. And so let's say they break ground and they build the temple. Maybe it could be another decade before we hit the year 6,000. So it's not a sign that, rapture soon, but that's how people want to take it. When I did my Watchman Desert video, I basically pointed out, yeah, we're close to the year 6,000, but potentially from just my calculations of going through all the genealogies in the book of Genesis and all the little chunks of time, whether it's Israel in Egypt or Babylon or whatever it is, and adding all that up, and I came to the year 5974. It's been a few years since I did that, so let's potentially say that the year 6000 happens some in the next 22 to 23 years. Now, do I believe that? No, I have evidence to suggest that those numbers may be a little bit off as well. But my point is, let's say they build a temple. If you do a quick Google search, it's basic. I saw the estimate that it would take to build that temple was 7 years, based on the second temple and its construction. Now, I think with our modern technology, we can build it a lot faster. I mean, my experience alone was I worked as a plumber's assistant for 3 months, and at the turn of the century, the big thing was everybody was trying to rush into cell phones, and it eventually got whittled down to like the big four. I mean, there's a few others out there, but VoiceStream wanted a building built for their call center, and we showed up with basically a pad of gravel that was about 3 feet deep, limestone gravel. And we got to work digging holes and putting in all the plumbing and all that kind of stuff. By the end of the week, they had the pad poured. And it cured over that weekend. And then by Monday, the framing was going up, and we're going along with it. We're doing all the plumbing, and the electricians are pulling the wire and all that kind of stuff. By the end of the week, the beginning of the third week, we were in a fully dried-in building with walls and a roof. Other than a large opening at the end of the building, that's how quickly this thing went up. And that's so we could get scissor lifts and stuff in and out. But that is how quick this building went up. And so I think with modern technology, I've seen some estimates where they say, oh, if we started building the temple, we could have it up in 3 to 6 months or something like that. But that still doesn't mean that the temple may not run for a decade before we hit the year 6000. You're not going to bring this in any faster. Time is time. And at this point, you're, 10 minutes closer than you were when you started this video. So, yeah, I mean, you can say you're closer, but we don't know. And so I don't take these things that are going on in Israel as signs that we're close to the end any more than just doing the math itself. So anyway, so I reached out to Candace and Bruce, and I was just like, am I wrong in thinking this? Like, I don't think a Christian should be participating in enabling this. And Bruce responded, he said, no, I don't think you're wrong. And he said, yeah, I also looked into the guy as well. And he showed the email traffic. And he's like, yeah, how much money do you need? And he wouldn't give him a firm answer. He says, but we want 50 tons of gold for this project. And we're trying to get it for free from these countries, which Candace pointed out were just poor African countries. And so I'm sitting there doing the math on this because I'm watching what's going on with gold right now. And these people want $5 trillion at current market value, $5 trillion worth of gold. So that's probably why he didn't overtly say, yeah, this is how much money we need to get this done. But again, I don't think a Christian should be involved in this at all. If the unbelieving Jews want to build a temple and start doing the sacrifices, then, they can do them, you do you kind of thing. But a Christian involved in this? No. And I think it really goes back to selfish ambition. The same selfish ambition that I see from all these quote-unquote watch people that are on here. Because everything is a sign of the end. And the thing is, we're told that people in the last days will heap together for themselves teachers for their itching ears. People want to hear what they want to hear. I mean, I've experienced it over the past 8 years of being on YouTube. You come in here and you start talking about the rapture being, Yom Teruah and all that kind of stuff, and potentially this year or whatever, people will subscribe all day. You get past that point and mention that Christmas is a pagan witch's Sabbath called Yule, unsubscribe. Don't want to listen to that. That goes against what because I like my Christmas and I don't want to give that up. Again, I go back to I'm sort of unique in the fact that I see the world much differently than most other people. When I realized that Christmas was a pagan holiday, I didn't want to celebrate it. I didn't want to observe it anymore. Yeah, the family had to do it and all that kind of stuff, and I went to the parties or whatever, but I was not willing to do that anymore. And so, but, it's the hardest thing for me to ever give up, because it was ingrained in me. And I understand where people come from. I understand why people in religion are stubborn. And I understand why Paul just said, continue doing this as a believer in Yeshua. But I was brought up that you tithe, that was non-negotiable. And so when I started serving God, I was making sure that exactly 10% of my income went and at times it wasn't a lot. But anyway, a few years later, I came across websites that went through all the laws that basically point out the tithe was never money. It was produce from the land. The tithe goes to the Levites, not the New Testament church. The tithe is under the law. And so I had to make a decision. Am I going to continue to do what I have taught that that's what you're supposed to do, or am I going to obey the word? And it was relatively simple. It was hard. It was hard at first, but I'm going to obey what the word says. And so I stopped. The thing is, I know a lot of people have a hard time with that. And even when it came to the tithe, and I pointed out to people, they're just like, "Oh, I'm going to pray for you. Oh, thanks for virtue signaling. Appreciate it." But for me, I read it, I want to do it. And I think a lot of people drag too much emotion and too much belief in the wrong thing into it, and that's why they can't let it go. And that's why they were ready to unalive Paul in that moment. But I don't think that Acts chapter 21 is an example of making an excuse to enable the unbelieving Jews to start the sacrifices up again. I just don't think a Christian should be involved in that. And I have to question the motives of somebody that would do that. But then again, I question the motives of a lot of people on YouTube that have amassed 100,000 subs because all they talk about is the rapture. Like, there are other things to talk about, but we don't want to touch on those. It's also the same when it comes to the people that build churches. Like, they're not, I watched that church for a year and a half or so, whatever. And when they would talk about sin, they would talk about sin that was most likely not in their church. Things like homosexuality and stuff like that. Like that, they would bring that stuff up because they knew they wouldn't offend anybody. But don't bring up the sin of, say, gluttony. I mean, after all, Yeshua was accused of being a wine bibber and a glutton. So, and it's funny, in those churches you have to completely abstain from wine, but you can be fat. It's like, well, if we're supposed to abstain from that, then you have to abstain from food, which that's not logical because you need food for nutrients and energies. So it's moderation. And that really kind of goes back also to some of the other things that Paul said as it relates to essentially Acts 21, which is do things according to your conscience. If you think it's wrong, then it's wrong. Also, don't do things that may cause your brother to stumble. So if your brother was an alcoholic, then maybe if you're going to have a drink, don't do it around them because you don't want them to stumble. Some Christians are stronger, some Christians are weaker. And so as Christians, we are supposed to kind of see that. And so if there's things that you can do that may cause another Christian to stumble, then don't do it in front of them. And that's essentially the point of Acts 21, as far as, no, if you want to continue to the sacrifices and all that as a believer, then you do you. Whereas I think if I were in that situation and I saw the resurrection, all that kind of stuff, and it's like, we no longer have to do this, I think I'd probably be the type of person that's like, okay, well, then I guess I'm not going to do that anymore. And I think that situation is essentially what sort of led Paul further into the Gentile world. And he also made the point that, when in Rome, so when he said that he was around the Jewish people, he acted like a Jew. And when he was around the Romans, he acted like a Roman. And again, you really have to take the context of what he was actually saying instead of just taking those few little verses and not see the overall picture of what Paul actually taught. But again, I'm different. I see the world differently. I mean, after all, I felt like I had to make the video on the P320 when everybody was trashing it. And I'm like, too many coincidences here. Why don't you wait a minute before you trash it? I'm not buying this. And none of those videos are popping up anymore. No more screws in the trigger guard because it has turned out that there has been an airman that has been charged with, I think, like unintentional manslaughter or something like that, and a few other charges. But it's just like, that makes a little bit more sense. That maybe, somebody was screwing around and ended up ending somebody's life, and that maybe it wasn't a faulty firearm. But then again, that's why I kind of sat back. But nobody's talking about that. No, because that kind of goes against the bandwagon narrative that got the thing started to begin with. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Video over. Go touch some grass.